Beneath a blinding winter storm, a cruel stranger tossed a tiny shepherd puppy onto the frozen road. The moment Jack Sterling, a veteran scarred by memories of abandoned brothers-in-arms, saw it happen, something inside him cracked open. He rushed in, scooping the trembling pup into his arms as if saving a lost piece of his own soul. Jack thought he was simply rescuing a helpless dog, but he had no idea a violent showdown was already taking shape in the shadows of this quiet town. Stay until the end. This story will grip you harder than the winter cold. And don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. The winter wind curled across Cedar Ridge with a sharpened, merciless edge. It was the kind of cold that seeped through leather, bone, and memory. Something Jack Sterling, a 45-year-old former soldier with a chiseled jaw and a permanently furrowed brow, knew all too well. His weathered face carried the quiet heaviness of a man who had seen more than he ever spoke of. A faint scar ran from his left cheekbone to his jawline, a relic from a mission gone wrong, one that had taken two of his closest brothers-in-arms. Since leaving the service, Jack preferred silence over crowds, solitude over conversation, and the open mountain roads over any place that reminded him of the world's cruelty. His battered motorcycle, a black 1986 Roadstar with rusted handlebars and a seat patched together with duct tape, was the only companion he trusted without hesitation. As he descended the winding mountain pass, snowflakes struck the visor of his helmet like tiny sparks of ice. Visibility dropped to a thin gray haze, but Jack handled the terrain with instinctive ease. The muffled roar of the engine echoed through the canyon, a lonely sound swallowed almost instantly by the storm. Then, without warning, a black pickup truck lurched to a stop ahead, its tires skidding on the icy road. The vehicle looked like a decade-old Ford, dented doors, cracked taillight, and a thick layer of dried mud masking its plates. The driver's window slid down only a few inches, but enough for Jack to glimpse a hand, pale, masculine, covered in grease, reach out into the freezing air. And then he saw it. A small, helpless body was hurled out of the car and crashed into the snowbank at the roadside. A yelp, thin, terrified, cut through the wind. The pickup sped off before Jack could so much as shout, disappearing around the bend like a coward fleeing the scene of a crime. Jack braked so hard the motorcycle fishtailed, but he didn't care. He threw the bike onto its kickstand and rushed toward the snowbank. There, trembling violently, lay a German shepherd puppy, no more than 8 weeks old. Its fur, black and sable, was clumped with wet snow, and its tiny ribs shook beneath its shallow breaths. Its eyes, mismatched in color, one amber, one deep brown, held a fear Jack recognized instantly, the same fear that he once carried returning from war. "Easy there, little guy," Jack murmured, shrugging off his worn leather jacket. The jacket had been with him since his second deployment, stained at the sleeve with engine oil and old memories. He wrapped the puppy tightly inside it. The small creature pressed its muzzle weakly into his chest as if pleading for a reason to keep living. Something tightened in Jack's chest, a quiet, aching tug he hadn't felt in years. He lifted the puppy and hurried to his bike, cradling it as if it were made of glass. There was only one place he trusted to help. Sarah Whitmore, his childhood friend and the only veterinarian in Cedar Ridge. Sarah, now in her early 40s, was a petite woman with long chestnut hair usually tied into a loose braid, soft green eyes, and a calm voice that could soothe even the most terrified animal. She had always been gentle, compassionate, but strong enough to stand tall after losing both parents to illness during their teenage years. That loss shaped her into someone who never abandoned the vulnerable. When Jack burst into her clinic, boots soaked, breath steaming, jacket wrapped around the trembling pup, Sarah didn't waste a second. "Oh, Jack, what happened?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she peeled back the jacket. Under the examination lights, the truth was even harsher. The puppy's belly was bruised in blotches of purple and blue. Its left ear bore a faint cut in the shape of a crude triangle. an intentional mark. His bones were intact, but the trauma was clear. "This wasn't an accident," Sarah said quietly. Her brows knitted in anger, a rare emotion from her. "Someone meant to get rid of him." Jack swallowed hard. "I'm calling him Shadow." The name slipped out unexpectedly, but it fit. Small, silent, clinging to life like a fading silhouette. Sarah nodded softly. Shadow. A strong name. He'll need strength to survive. She worked through the night, cleaning wounds, injecting fluids, wrapping the puppy in warm blankets. Jack stayed beside the table the entire time, refusing to leave even when his fingers went numb. Watching Shadow fight for every breath stirred something deep in him. Something protective. Something raw. Something painfully human. By dawn, Shadow slept more peacefully, curled at Jack's boots. Snow still drifted outside as Jack stepped out to breathe the cold morning air. But then he froze. The black pickup truck, the same dents, the same cracked taillight, was parked arrogantly in front of the Cedar Ridge Police Department. A chill that had nothing to do with winter stabbed through Jack's spine. This wasn't random. This wasn't distant. The monster who threw Shadow away lived right here in this town. And now Jack knew exactly where to start looking. Night settled over Cedar Ridge like a heavy shroud, the air thick with frost and the faint metallic smell of coming snow. Jack Sterling moved through the tree line with the silent precision of a man shaped by war, each step careful, each breath measured. Shadow lay asleep back at Sarah's clinic, curled up in layers of wool blankets, safe for the moment. But the image of the black pickup truck parked brazenly in front of the police station gnawed at Jack like a blade pressing against bone. Whoever had thrown Shadow away wasn't just cruel, they believed themselves untouchable, and men who believed that were always the most dangerous. The mountain road faded into a narrow, unlit trail cutting through a dense forest of ponderosa pines. Their tall trunks loomed like silent sentinels, shadows pooling thick beneath their boughs. Jack tracked the pickup's tire marks until they disappeared at the edge of a forgotten logging route. The forest grew darker, quieter, the kind of quiet that felt staged, as if the woods were holding their breath. Eventually, a faint glow bled through the branches. Jack crouched low, narrowed his storm-gray eyes, and listened. Male voices, gruff and coarse, drifted through the cold. Then the outline of a warehouse emerged, its corrugated metal walls rusted, its roof sagging under decades of snow. A single floodlight flickered above the entrance, casting a jaundiced halo over the scene. 2 guards flanked the door. One was tall and wiry, wearing an oversized camouflage jacket and puffing nervously on a cigarette. The other was bulkier. Earl Maddox, a local mechanic known for his temper and his beer belly. Earl, in his late 40s, had a square face hidden beneath several days' worth of patchy stubble. His broken nose, crooked from too many bar fights, leaned slightly to the left. Earl had always been a bully, the kind who spat on the ground when he was wrong and hit first when he was scared. Years of debts and poor decisions had dragged him into the orbit of men far worse than him. Jack stayed hidden behind a stack of logs until the guards drifted toward each other, lost in conversation. Then he slipped along the wall, keeping to the shadows. An old service window sat half open near the back. He eased it up, slid inside, and landed silently on a concrete floor slick with damp. The inside reeked of blood, urine, and cheap disinfectant. Jack's jaw clenched. A narrow hallway opened into a cavernous chamber lit by hanging industrial lamps. Beneath their sickly yellow glow stood rows of makeshift cages built from welded rebar and rusted fencing. Inside them were German shepherds, pit bulls, and Malinois, some snarling with pent-up aggression, others lying limp with exhaustion. Their fur was matted, their eyes dull with pain. The cruelty of it twisted something deep in Jack's chest, a hot coil of anger rising like a tide. Then Jack heard laughter, smug, confident, and all too familiar. A small group of men, stood on a raised platform overlooking the cages. At the center was Sheriff Curtis Langdon, a tall man with silver hair slicked back with too much pomade. In his 50s, he still had the rigid bearing of a former Marine, but none of the honor. His sharp jaw and neatly trimmed goatee gave him an air of authority he wielded like a weapon. Sheriff Langdon had built a reputation as a pillar of the community, but his cold blue eyes revealed the truth. He was a man born to take, not give. Beside him stood Mayor Alan Cray, short, round-bellied, and always sweating, even in winter. His pink, fleshy face shone under the lamp, and his thinning blonde hair curled awkwardly around his ears. Cray talked with the over-eager energy of someone terrified of losing power. Jack listened as Langdon spoke, his voice calm and almost amused. "Final match of the season tonight, boys. Big money coming in from Cheyenne, even Denver. Titan will put on a show." Jack's stomach twisted. Titan? The way Langdon said the name was not admiration, it was ownership. Jack crept along the shadows until he reached the back rows of cages. The dogs there were quieter, as if they had already surrendered to misery. And in the final cage, he found Titan. The shepherd was enormous, easily 90 pounds, with a frame built from muscle and scar tissue. His fur, once likely proud and thick, now hung in clumps of black and tan. One ear bore the same triangular mark Jack had seen on Shadow. Titan lifted his head slowly, his breath rattling. His amber eyes, Shadow's eyes, held a haunting mixture of defiance and resignation. Jack knelt, feeling his throat tighten. "Your kid made it," he whispered. "He's alive." Titan blinked, and something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of life beneath the exhaustion. Jack felt a surge of heat behind his ribs, a desire to tear down every man responsible for this cruelty. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began recording. The cages, the dogs, the betting boards on the wall, the faces of Langdon and Cray. Everything he would need. But then, as Jack leaned forward to capture Titan's earmarking, his elbow brushed against a metal feeding pan. It clattered onto the concrete floor with a sharp, echoing clang. Instantly, the conversation on the platform stopped. "Did you hear that?" someone growled. Boots pounded against metal stairs. Jack cursed silently. A flashlight beam exploded across the cages. "There, by Titan's pen." The guards lunged forward. Jack's escape route vanished in an instant. He had been discovered. Jack Sterling burst through the back door of the warehouse and disappeared into the forest's jagged shadows, his boots cracking through frozen underbrush as shouts erupted behind him. Though the icy wind lashed at his face, it felt far less brutal than the knowledge burning inside him. The men who ran Cedar Ridge, men sworn to protect it, were the architects of its filthiest secret. His breaths came in ragged, disciplined bursts as he sprinted toward the town's edge, retracing the familiar route to Sarah's clinic. He didn't stop until the amber glow of her windows flickered through the tree line. The small building, once a place of healing, now felt like the last bastion of sanity in a town swallowed by corruption. Inside, Sarah Whitmore looked up from Shadow's warming crate the moment Jack crashed through the door. Her usually calm face tightened with alarm. Her soft green eyes widened behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She was still in her navy scrubs, her chestnut braid fraying at the ends from stress. "Jack? What happened?" she whispered, already reading the urgency in his rigid posture. "We don't have time," he replied, voice low. "Lock the windows. Turn off the lights. They know someone was there. They'll come." His tone, firm but edged with a kind of fear he rarely allowed, sent a chill through the room. Moments later, a car engine growled outside. Then another. Jack's instincts snapped into sharp focus. He moved through the clinic with military precision, pushing a cabinet against the front door, sliding metal tables to block entry points and switching off every lamp until the space drowned in shadows. His pulse steadied. This was a battlefield, and he understood battlefields better than he understood peace. Shadow, still small but stronger after Sarah's care, lifted his head from the blanket. The 8-week-old shepherd puppy let out a faint growl, an instinctive warning from deep in his bloodline. Jack knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. "Good boy," he whispered. "Stay close." The first blow came suddenly, glass shattering as the front window exploded inward. A figure hurled through, landing on his knees. Deputy Ron Hall, a man in his late 30s with a thick beard and a perpetual smirk, rose to his feet. His face was round but hardened by arrogance, his eyes small and mean, brimming with the cruelty he enjoyed inflicting. Ron had always been eager to prove himself to Sheriff Langdon, but years of being belittled had warped him into a man desperate for approval, regardless of the destruction required to earn it. "Jack Sterling," Ron sneered, cracking his knuckles. "The sheriff wants a word." Jack gave no reply, only motion. He swept a metal tray off the counter, throwing it toward Ron's face. The deputy ducked, but the distraction allowed Jack to slam his shoulder into him, pinning him against the wall. Ron cursed, swinging wildly, but Jack disarmed him, with a precise strike to the wrist. The gun clattered across the floor. Before Jack could restrain him, boots thundered on the porch. More were coming. "We can't stay," Sarah whispered, breath quivering but resolve strong. She wasn't a fighter, but she had the steady courage of someone who had learned to endure loss without breaking. She grabbed Shadow's crate, holding it tight against her chest. Jack dragged Ron into the storage room, bound him with vet tape, gagged him with a towel, and shut the door. "State Police, Sarah. I need to call Morgan." Lieutenant Samuel Morgan, Jack's former squad mate, answered on the second ring. Morgan, now in his early 40s, was a tall man with dark skin, a clean-shaven head, sharp cheekbones, and deep-set eyes that always seemed to read more than people said. He had survived an IED blast years ago, leaving a burn scar across his right shoulder and a permanent distrust of anyone who hid behind authority. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and edged with conviction. "Jack, I haven't heard that tone since Fallujah. What's going on?" Jack told him everything. Titan, the arena, the officials, Shadow's origins. Morgan didn't hesitate. "We're coming," he said. "Tonight." There was no time to rest. Jack, Sarah, and Shadow slipped out the clinic's back door minutes before several officers stormed the front. They moved through alleys and wooded paths, guided by the weak moonlight. By the time they reached the ridge overlooking the warehouse, Morgan and a team of 4 state officers were already there. Each wore tactical winter gear, faces set in grim determination. As they huddled behind fallen logs, Morgan placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You ready to finish this?" Jack looked down at Shadow nestled against Sarah's coat, then toward the warehouse where Titan awaited a fate worse than death. "I'm more than ready." Inside, the championship bout was underway. Spectators, wealthy locals, gamblers from nearby cities, a few off-duty officers, surrounded the dirt ring. Titan was chained by a handler, a burly man named Clay Donner, whose shaved head, tattooed arms, and cruel grin marked him as someone who took pleasure in violence. Clay had once been a promising boxer until a broken wrist ended his career. Bitterness and easy money had driven him here, where he molded dogs through fear and pain. Morgan signaled. The raid began. Doors burst open, flashlights flared, officers shouted commands. Chaos detonated like a bomb. Jack charged straight toward Titan's cage, dodging panicked gamblers and overturned tables. Clay lunged at him, swinging a broken bottle, but Jack dropped low, sweeping his leg and knocking the man flat. With hands shaking, not from fear but from urgency, Jack forced the cage lock open. Titan stepped forward, enormous frame trembling. His scarred muzzle lifted toward Jack's chest. He inhaled. Shadow's scent. Recognition flickered. Something softened. "Go!" Jack urged. Titan turned, not toward escape but toward the men who had tormented him. His roar echoed across the arena. He leapt, teeth bared, scattering handlers, crushing years of cruelty beneath his fury. Panic surged. Gamblers fled. Officers dove for cover. And through the chaos, state police swept in, arresting Sheriff Langdon, Mayor Cray, and every corrupt official tied to the operation. It was over. Titan stopped beside Jack, chest heaving, eyes blazing with the fire of a soul reclaiming itself. Jack placed a hand on Titan's neck. "You're free now," he whispered. And for the first time, Titan lowered his head, not in defeat, but in peace. Morning crept softly over Cedar Ridge, its pale light brushing the rooftops as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace left behind after the raid. For the first time in years, the town breathed without tension. Sirens had been replaced by birdsong, gunshots by the distant rumble of ranch trucks on their way to the fields. The storm of corruption had finally cracked, allowing sunlight to spill into the shadows where secrets once nested. Jack Sterling stood outside the temporary animal shelter set up near Sarah Whitmore's clinic. His shoulders, broad and scarred by old wounds, seemed somehow lighter now. His gray eyes, usually cold as steel, softened as he surveyed the animals rescued from the warehouse. Many were malnourished, trembling or fearful of human touch, living reminders of the cruelty that had festered beneath Cedar Ridge's surface. Yet, beneath the pain, Jack sensed flickers of hope, a second chance. Inside the clinic, Titan lay on a thick blanket warmed by heating pads. The enormous shepherd, now finally freed, looked older without the cage walls pressing around him. His black and tan fur had patches worn thin, scars slashing across his body like a map of every battle he had been forced to fight. His breaths were slow but steady, and when Jack knelt beside him, Titan lifted his head, amber eyes glowing with a dignity no man had been able to break. Sarah knelt opposite Jack, her delicate hands stroking Titan's muzzle with such tenderness it almost broke Jack's composure. Weeks of exhaustion had shadowed her face, yet her compassion remained untouched, her green eyes warm, her features gentle even in sorrow. Titan exhaled through his nose, the sound soft, almost grateful. "He's holding on," Sarah murmured, though her voice trembled. "But the internal damage, it's been there for years. His heart is tired, Jack." Jack placed a hand on Titan's chest, feeling the faint, irregular rhythm beneath. "He saved us," he whispered. "He deserves to rest." Titan shifted, pressing his head into Jack's palm, a gesture of trust from a creature that had learned only violence. Shadow, now a few months older and recovering quickly, trotted inside and sniffed his father gently. The younger shepherd had grown taller, his fur thicker, his mismatched eyes bright with life. He nudged Titan's cheek softly, as if urging him to stay. But Titan's breathing slowed. His ears, once sharp and alert, even in pain, relaxed into stillness. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Titan's breaths diminished, flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. A few minutes later, the champion of Cedar Ridge, the dog forced to fight hundreds of battles he never chose, let out a final, slow exhale. Sarah leaned into Jack's shoulder. Shadow whimpered and curled against Titan's still chest. Jack bowed his head, his jaw trembling with a grief he hadn't felt since the battlefield. Titan's long twilight of suffering had ended, not in a ring of blood and shouting gamblers, but in a clinic filled with warmth, love, and peace. Jack whispered, "Thank you, old boy. We'll take it from here." Spring bled into summer, and with it came renewal. Jack spent weeks negotiating with the county to acquire the old warehouse grounds, now cleared of cages, bloodstains, and the ghosts of a darker era. Sarah threw herself into fundraising, designing treatment rooms, outdoor yards, and recovery wings with the determined passion of someone who refused to let the past repeat itself. Volunteers appeared one by one. Retirees, ranchers, local teens, even a few outsiders who had read about the raid. Among them was Marvin Hale, a middle-aged carpenter with sandy blonde hair, thick arms, and a quiet demeanor shaped by the loss of his wife years before. Kind-hearted and gentle, Marvin used his craftsmanship to repair fences, rebuild kennels, and carve wooden signs. Grief had once hardened him, but seeing the rescued animals slowly recover brought warmth back to his pale blue eyes. Together, they rebuilt the warehouse piece by piece. New floors replaced the old dirt pits. Fresh paint covered the stains. Windows were opened to let in sunlight instead of trapping in screams. Where cruelty once thrived, healing began. They named it the Cedar Ridge Rescue and Rehabilitation Center. Shadow grew quickly, his limbs strong, his stance proud. Though he inherited Titan's noble posture, he carried a gentleness that belonged only to himself. He had no desire to fight, only to protect, to play, to run beneath the open sky. His presence seemed to bring comfort to the other dogs. They softened around him, trusted more easily. One quiet summer morning, Jack sat on the wooden porch they had built in front of the center. The sun rose warm and golden over the ridge, bathing the valley in soft hues. Shadow sprinted across the grass with unrestrained joy, his tail slicing through the air like a banner of triumph. Jack watched him with a rare smile. He had once believed his life ended on the battlefield, that purpose was a thing given only to younger men. But here, in a town reborn from its own darkness, with a loyal dog at his side and Sarah's laughter drifting from the clinic window, Jack finally felt something he had not felt in years: belonging. Shadow bounded up the porch steps and pressed his head against Jack's hand. Those eyes, bright, alive, reminded Jack of Titan, but without the pain, without the weight. "Yeah, buddy," Jack murmured, scratching behind his ear. "Your father would be proud." And so the story closed where hope began. A lone soldier who found meaning again, a puppy once abandoned now running free, and a town once stained by shadows now waking to a new dawn filled with the sound of healing. In the end, the story of Jack, Titan, and Shadow reminds us that miracles do not always arrive in flashes of light or voices from the heavens. Sometimes they come quietly through the courage of a wounded animal, the compassion of a weary soul, or the small choices ordinary people make to stand against cruelty. In every rescued life, in every act of mercy, we see the gentle work of God's hand moving through the world, urging us toward kindness even when the path is steep. And just as Jack found purpose again, we too can find strength in love, forgiveness, and the belief that no creature is too broken to be healed. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need a reminder that hope still exists. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe so you never miss a story that brings light into dark places. May God bless you and protect you, today and always, as you continue to choose compassion in your daily life.